You unfolded the map on the table and the whole world changed. Not the real world, a better one. One made of hexagons and cardboard and rules so dense they came in a booklet the size of a short novel. You punch the counters out of the cardboard sheet, that satisfying pop, one after another. Tiny squares with numbers and symbols and silhouettes of tanks and infantry and artillery, and you stack them on the map, and you looked across the table at your friend, and you both knew that the next 6 hours belonged to this. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Nobody walked into Avalon Hill by accident. You didn't find it on a shelf at Toys R Us between Monopoly and Sorry. You found it because someone showed it to you, an older kid, a cousin, a friend's older brother who had a game called PanzerBlitz spread across his bedroom floor and looked at you like you might be ready. You sat down. He explained the rules. You didn't understand half of them. You played anyway. And somewhere around the third turn, when your Panzer pushed through a gap in his line and he said something you'd never heard anyone say about a board game. Something angry, something real, something that meant he was actually trying to beat you. You understood. This wasn't a game. This was a conversation between two minds, and the board was just the language. That was Avalon Hill. And once you spoke the language, you never stopped. The setup was a ritual. You cleared the table. You opened the box, that long, flat box with the painting on the cover, always a painting, never a photograph. Because the battles Avalon Hill recreated deserved art, not snapshots. You unfolded the map. You punched the counters if it was a new game, or you opened the plastic bag where you kept them if you'd played before. You read the setup instructions and placed each unit on its designated hex. You checked the scenario card, you chose your side, and then you read the rules again. Because Avalon Hill rules were not suggestions, they were law. And if you didn't know the law, the game would punish you for it. The games were long. That was the point. Gettysburg took an afternoon. Afrika Korps took an evening. PanzerBlitz took a Saturday morning if you played fast. Third Reich, the grand strategy game that covered all of World War II in Europe, took an entire weekend. 2 players, 1 map, 6 years of history compressed into 40 hours of dice rolls and supply calculations and strategic decisions that felt more consequential than anything you'd ever done in school. Some of you played Squad Leader, the tactical game, man-to-man combat in the rubble of Stalingrad, the hedgerows of Normandy, the forests of the Ardennes. You moved individual squads, you fired machine guns, you called in mortar strikes, and when a squad broke under fire and ran, you felt it. Not because the cardboard square moved backward on the map, but because you'd invested 3 turns getting those men into position, and now they were running and your whole plan was collapsing and your friend across the table was smiling because he saw it too. Squad Leader wasn't one game, it was a system. Cross of Iron expanded it, Crescendo of Doom expanded it further. Sauce, Anvil of Victory pushed it to a level of complexity that made Third Reich look like tic-tac-toe. Some of you played Squad Leader every weekend for years. You memorized the terrain modifiers. You knew which leaders could rally broken squads and which ones couldn't. You argued about line of sight across a hex grain boundary at 2 in the morning, and neither of you was willing to give an inch because this mattered. And then there was diplomacy. 7 players, no dice, no luck, just negotiation, alliance, and betrayal. You sat around a table with 6 other people, friends, classmates, sometimes brothers, and you made deals. You promised to support someone's attack on Austria. You swore you wouldn't stab them in the back. And then you wrote your orders on a slip of paper and handed it in, and when the orders were read aloud, everyone found out who lied. Diplomacy destroyed friendships. Not in the way people say a board game is frustrating, in the way that looking someone in the eye, shaking their hand, promising your support, and then watching their face when they realize you sent your armies somewhere else. That kind of destruction, real trust, broken over a cardboard map of Europe in someone's basement on a Friday night. Some of you haven't spoken to someone since a game of diplomacy in 1978. You know who you are, and you know what you did. Every 2 months, a magazine arrived in the mail, The General, published by Avalon Hill from 1964 to 1998, 34 years without missing an issue. It had tactics articles, historical essays, scenario variants, and letters from readers who analyzed their games the way chess masters analyze openings. You read it cover to cover, you tried the strategies, you argued about them with your friends, you saved every issue. The General wasn't just a magazine, it was proof that what you were doing on that table, the 6-hour Saturdays, the midnight rules arguments, the friendships tested by diplomacy, was part of something larger, a community, a hobby, a world that existed inside Hexagons. Some of you played by mail. You made your move, wrote it on a postcard, mailed it to your opponent across the country, and waited. A week later, his move arrived. You studied it. You responded. A single game of Third Reich could take 6 months by mail. You had a shoebox full of postcards from a man you'd never met, each one containing a move in a war you were fighting across a kitchen table that existed in 2 houses 1,000 miles apart. You knew his handwriting better than your own brother's. Avalon Hill published Civilization in 1980, not the computer game, the board game that inspired the computer game. 7 players, 14 hours, the entire sweep of human history from the invention of agriculture to the fall of empires. You started with a single token on a map of the ancient Mediterranean, and you built a civilization from nothing, trading, expanding, surviving plagues, civil wars, and catastrophes. When Sid Meier made his famous computer game in 1991, he named it after this board game and paid for the license. The original was better. It had to be, because you were sitting across from 6 other human beings, and every one of them was trying to take what you built. Once a year, Avalon Hill hosted Origins, one of the first major game conventions in America. You drove or flew or took a bus to wherever it was being held that year, and for 3 days you played games with strangers who weren't strangers because they spoke the same language you spoke. The language of hexes and supply lines and combat results tables. You entered tournaments, you met designers, you bought games that weren't in stores yet. You came home with a bag full of boxes and a head full of strategies and the certainty that you belonged to something. And here's the thing nobody talks about. This hobby, this complicated, slow, demanding, sometimes frustrating hobby that required you to read a 40-page rulebook before you could make your first move, made you smarter. It taught you to think 3 moves ahead, to manage resources, to calculate odds, to read another person's intentions across a table, to lose gracefully and learn from it, to win without gloating because you knew the person across from you would remember. Every general, every CEO, every programmer, every analyst who grew up playing Avalon Hill games will tell you the same thing. It wasn't a hobby, it was training, and they didn't know it at the time. All of this started in a garage. Every hex, every counter, every issue of The General, every postcard, every 6-hour Saturday, every broken friendship over diplomacy. Charles S. Roberts lived in the Avalon neighborhood of Catonsville, Maryland. In 1952, he started building a game in his garage, a board game about warfare that was complete in one box. Map, counters, rules, everything. He called it Tactics. He sold 2,000 copies by mail in 5 years. But Roberts saw something no one else saw, a market for serious games played by adults who wanted more than rolling dice and moving tokens around a track. In 1958, he incorporated as Avalon Hill, named after his neighborhood, and published Gettysburg, the first board war game based on an actual historical battle. By 1962, Avalon Hill was the 4th largest board game company in America. Then Roberts went bankrupt. The man who invented an entire hobby couldn't pay his printer. In 1963, he handed the company to his 2 biggest creditors, Monarch Services, a printing company owned by a man named Eric Dott, and J.E. Smith, who made the boxes. Eric Dott ran Avalon Hill for the next 36 years. He was not a game player. He never played a single Avalon Hill game. The man who controlled the company that invented Wargaming, published The General, and created Origins, one of the largest game conventions in the world, did not play games. He was a printer, a businessman. He kept the lights on, the boxes moving, and the magazine shipping, and for that, the hobby owes him a debt. But the founder was gone, and the heart of the company beat differently after that. On August 4th, 1998, employees who had just been fired posted a notice on the Avalon Hill website. Monarch Avalon had sold the Avalon Hill Game Company to Hasbro for $6 million. All game design staff had been terminated. The notice was pulled almost immediately by management, but it was too late. The news spread across the internet, in the words of one observer, faster than a Clinton scandal report. Eric Dott told the Baltimore Sun that Hasbro had approached him about buying the company. He took the offer. Probably, he said, after about 7 seconds of thought, $6 million for the company that invented Wargaming, that published The General for 34 years, that created Origins, that sold Gettysburg, PanzerBlitz, Squad Leader, Diplomacy, Civilization, Third Reich, and 200 other games that taught a generation of boys how to think strategically, how to plan ahead, how to read a situation and make a decision and live with the consequences. $6 million for all of it. 7 seconds. The General stopped immediately. After 34 years and over 200 issues, the last one was the one before the phone call. No farewell issue, no final editorial, no goodbye, just silence. The way a war ends not with a ceremony, but with someone deciding it is over. Charles S. Roberts, the father of board wargaming, the man who built the first game in his garage and named his company after his neighborhood, died on August 20, 2010. He was 80 years old. The Charles S. Roberts Award, given annually for excellence in wargame design, carries his name. The hobby he created still exists, carried forward by smaller companies and passionate designers who grew up unfolding maps on kitchen tables. But the company he built, the company that started it all, is a name on a Hasbro box now, attached to games it never made. If you ever sat at that table, if you ever punched those counters out of the sheet and heard that pop and felt the weight of a Saturday, with nothing to do but fight a war that happened before you were born, you know what Avalon Hill was? It wasn't a game company. It was the place where you learned that thinking was a thing you could do for fun. That strategy was a language. That a map on a table could hold more drama than anything on television. And if you ever played diplomacy, if you ever looked a friend in the eye and lied, or watched him lie to you, and felt the knife go in, you know something else. You know that the best games aren't the ones you win, they're the ones you still remember. 40 years later, at 2 in the morning, across a table that isn't there anymore with friends who are. Tell us in the comments, what was the first Avalon Hill game you ever played?